Hi. My name's Maya. And my sister, the golden girl of our family, once asked me to co-sign her dream. I said yes. I built it quietly, funded it silently, even handed it to her on paper. But last week she stood in the middle of her yoga studio, smiled, and said, "She's not really one of us, she just helps clean the mats." Then, her fiancé, yoga instructor, local hero, swept me in front of the whole class, laughed, and said, "Every studio needs a punching bag." Their cruel words ignited a fury that burned deeper than any wound. 12 seconds later, I left them both gasping. But what hurt the most wasn't the fall, it was realizing how long I'd been trained to bow to people who never saw me standing. They'd printed bios on glossy paper, slipped them into black lacquered frames, and lined the entry wall of Serenity Flow like a shrine. "Meet the founders," the heading read in bold silver letters. Julia's picture, mid-pose, all teeth and muscle, was centered like a magazine cover. Ethan was right beside her, arms crossed, chin lifted. Beneath them were blurbs about vision, discipline, and legacy. I scanned the lineup once, then again. No mention of me. Not even a thank you note tucked into the corner. Their deliberate erasure was a public slap in the face. The air smelled faintly of rubber mats and eucalyptus cleaner. A couple stood near the wall, admiring the setup.
"That's them,"
the man whispered, pointing to Ethan. "Real deal." I stepped back, flattening myself to the side so they could take a photo. "Don't worry about her." Julia's voice chimed behind me like a wind chime swinging off tempo. "Maya likes staying in the background." Her concession was a knife twisted in my heart. I turned. She was sweeping past me with her usual theatrical grace. Arms full of Serenity Flow water bottles, her hair in a perfectly slick ponytail, one kiss planted on Ethan's cheek. He grinned like a man who'd just inherited a kingdom. I swallowed whatever rose in my throat and walked further into the studio. There was music coming from the main room, something upbeat, poppy. Folding mats were being dragged across the floor by 2 teenage volunteers in Serenity Flow shirts. I gave them a quick nod and headed downstairs, where I'd been asked to help set up. Just help with the guest flow. Julia had texted this morning like this was a brunch or a bake sale, not the grand reopening of a business I once believed we were building together. Downstairs smelled like fresh paint and damp plywood. The lights were harsh, casting shadows across the low ceiling. I knelt to open a bin of floor pads, pulling them out one by one, stacking them into position along the mirrored wall. From the hallway, I heard Ethan's voice carry. "That one?" His voice dropped to a mock whisper. "Oh, she's just here to make our average look more diverse." "Every studio needs a basement belt." There was laughter. Loud, easy, like a boy's locker room joke at someone else's expense. His mockery was a public humiliation. My hand locked on a foam mat. I didn't move. A second passed, then another. I blinked twice and kept laying them down one by one. Quiet, efficient, invisible. It wasn't the first time. At 13, I'd built Julia's first website on our family's dinosaur desktop computer. I used a free template and spent a weekend teaching myself HTML. Morris's sister's yoga blinked in red across the homepage. She told everyone it was a friend from class. Her lie stole my first victory. At 25, I co-signed the lease for her first studio when she didn't have the credit. She never missed a payment, never gave me trouble, but my name never made it onto the welcome packet or her press interviews. She used to say it was easier to keep things between sisters. Her secrecy was a betrayal of our bond. Our mom once told me, without irony, some of us are meant to shine, others to support. Don't take it personally. I didn't, at least not for a while. Upstairs, the open house was in full swing. Kids were trying on yoga bands, parents were sipping sparkling water, and watching Ethan demonstrate a basic pose on a weight hand 11-year-old with braces. Julia hovered nearby, all nods and approval, smiling for pictures. I helped reset the drink station in the corner. Someone had knocked over the ice bin. As I was wiping the countertop, I noticed the labels on the paper coffee cups. They were neatly printed in bold font. Coach Ethan, founder, Julia, media, guests, volunteers. There were no unlabeled ones left, no cup that said Maya, no title, no space. Their exclusion was a deliberate insult. I stood there for a second too long, holding the damp rag, staring at nothing. Around me the room moved, someone laughed, another volunteer offered a tour to a group of parents. I went outside. The cold air slapped my cheeks. My hands, still damp, stung in the wind. I looked up at the sky. Pale. Blank. Midday light. Behind me, the door creaked. "Hey," Ethan's voice called out casually like I was a delivery person or a board intern. "Could you grab a broom on your way back in?" I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just closed my eyes, let the air fill my lungs until the bitterness settled into something colder, quieter. His dismissal fueled my resolve to fight back. I used to think silence was a kind of nobility, but there's no dignity in being overlooked so thoroughly. People start treating you like part of the furniture. The next day, I stared at my gym bag for a long time. It sat by the door like a question I didn't want to answer. I wasn't going to go. I had every reason not to. My shoulders still ached from yesterday's fall, bruised more by the laughter than the landing. My pride had limped out behind me and hadn't come back in. I'd already written the mental excuse, "Hey, Jules, not feeling great? Going to skip today?" That would have been easy. But I didn't send it. Instead, I tied my shoes, zipped the bag, and left the house before I could overthink it. By the time I pulled into the Serenity Flow parking lot, the morning sun was just breaking through the fog. The building cast a long shadow across the lot, and everything about it felt colder than it had yesterday, like even the bricks remembered how I was treated. I stepped inside quietly, no grand entrance, no smiles, just the front desk girl handing me a clipboard without looking up. "Waiver, for yoga practice. Beginners only," she said flatly, tapping a spot where my name had been pre-filled on the beginner roster. I paused. "There must be a mistake. I've been practicing." She cut me off. "Coach Ethan handles placement, right?" His authority was a tool to diminish me. Of course he did. I signed the form and handed it back. The studio was still mostly empty, so I stretched alone in the corner. No one greeted me. No one joined me. Music played softly overhead, instrumental, vaguely motivational, and the mats under my feet felt harder than usual. Class began with warm-ups, light cardio, drills, nothing fancy. Ethan gave instructions like a showman, big voice, wide gestures. Everyone responded like they were at a TED Talk in act. Midway through, he clapped his hands and called everyone in. "Let's shake things up," he announced with a grin. "We're going to demo a fundamental balance technique." He scanned the group. I kept my eyes forward. Then I heard it. "Oh, Maya," he said. "Why don't you come up? Let's see what you can do." "Don't worry. We'll go easy." The way he said it, like a dare wrapped in faux encouragement, made something in me tighten. I stood slowly, walked to the center. My heart thumped, not from nerves, but from recognition. This wasn't a demo. This was theater. His intent was to humiliate me publicly. He faced me, nodded like it was all in good fun. "Okay, partner," he said loud enough for the others to hear. "Basic posture. Ready, go." Then, out of nowhere, he swept my leg. Not part of the drill, not part of the balanced technique, just a deliberate takedown. I hit the mat hard, flat on my back, air whooshing out of me like a balloon squeezed too tight. He turned to the others, not offering a hand. "See, that's what happens when you skip the basics. Laughter." It wasn't cruel on its own, it was how easy it came, how quickly people laugh when the target doesn't matter to them. Their glee at my fall was a crushing blow. I lay there longer than necessary. Not from pain, but because I needed a second to swallow everything I was feeling. The thud in my ears, the heat in my cheeks, the taste of metal in my mouth, like shame and restraint had fused. I sat up, smoothed my hair, bowed. "Thank you for the lesson, sir," I said evenly, not looking at him. Then I walked back to the edge of the mat. Not a single person spoke to me for the rest of the session. Later, in the locker room, I changed in silence. My towel slipped off the bench and I bent to pick it up just in time to hear Nora's voice. "Julia's favorite. She's like a slow-motion embarrassment reel," Nora whispered. Another voice responded, one of the newer assistants, I think. "Golden Girls charity case. Can't say no to family, right?" They both giggled. Their whispers were a final stab at my dignity. Doors slammed. Water ran. I sat still, the towel clutched in my lap like a defense I hadn't earned. By the time I got to my car, I couldn't feel my fingers. I turned on the engine and sat there for a while. The metal hanging from my rearview mirror spun slowly in the vent's breeze. It was my dad's army issue worn smooth on the back from his fingers, always rubbing it like a worry stone. He used to tell me, "Don't waste your strength on people who only see their own reflection." I hadn't thought about that in a while. Not until today. His wisdom was a lifeline amidst their cruelty, but maybe he was wrong, because the worst part wasn't wasting my strength. It was still hoping, after all this time, that they'd see me. I looked up, caught my own reflection in the mirror. My hair was frizzed at the edges, my eyes rimmed red. But what bothered me most was the softness, the hesitation, the part of me still asking for space at a table I helped build. I leaned forward, voice low, steady. "Next time I won't flinch." I meant what I whispered in the car that night, but 2 days later, when I walked into the studio again, something felt wrong. The air was too still. People were too polite. I nodded at Nora, but she turned quickly to her clipboard. A few students offered vague, clipped smiles, the kind you give someone at a funeral when you don't know what to say. The usual thrum of music wasn't playing. Even the receptionist looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Ethan wasn't around, and at first I thought that was a blessing, until I glanced at the front monitor behind the check-in counter. There it was, my body tumbling in slow motion on loop over and over. The footage from class. The moment Ethan swept me, my hip hitting the mat, the breath leaving my chest twice from 2 different angles, a caption in bold white letters beneath the video, "Why Basics Matter." Real-life example, their public shaming was a calculated attack. I didn't move, my shoes stuck to the floor like my body knew before my brain did. This wasn't just a misstep. This was deliberate. The promotional reel restarted again. It played like a training montage, except I was the cautionary tale. My name wasn't on it, but my face was impossible to miss. I turned away. A second screen near the merch shelf caught my eye. History of Serenity Flow was its title, with a sleek intro and upbeat soundtrack. I'd helped edit the original version of that video years ago. It had included footage from the very first garage classes we ran, clips I filmed on my old Canon, shaky but real. That version, gone. This one was polished, streamlined, sanitized. No mention of my name, no clips of me helping hang drywall or painting the logo in the original space. Not even a still photo. My voiceover, the one I recorded years ago, had been replaced. Now it was Julia narrating our shared beginnings like they were hers alone. Their erasure of my contribution was a vicious betrayal. I stood there watching it all wash over me like rain through a broken gutter. No pause, no mercy, just a quiet erasure done in broad daylight. As I walked toward the locker room, 2 students passed by me. One, a guy in a blue yoga outfit, smiled awkwardly and said, "Hey, that fall looked intense." Another, a woman I didn't recognize, added, "You're really brave for sticking with it. I wouldn't have come back." I didn't respond. I just nodded and kept walking. But inside, something started to unravel. It wasn't just the embarrassment. It was the awareness that everyone had seen me humiliated, and someone had chosen to make sure they kept seeing it. Back at home that evening, I kicked off my shoes and set my bag down gently like it might break. The apartment was quiet, save for the low hum of the fridge and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. I turned on my laptop to check email, not expecting much, but there it was, blinking at the top of my inbox, a message from my cousin in Denver. Subject: didn't know you were into yoga now. Body: just saw this. Is that real? Followed by a link. I clicked TikTok, a wellness page with over 500,000 followers. There I was again, falling. Captioned: when your sister pities you enough to let you practice. The clip was clipped cruelly just the moment of the sweep, followed by my stunned expression, looping drenched in irony. Their viral mockery was a global assault on my dignity. The comments were worse. She's got the athleticism of a folding chair. Bet that's the owner's sister, Nepo belt. Yikes. You'd think after that she'd quit. I didn't scroll anymore. I didn't cry. I just sat there, still. Then I picked up my phone and texted Jelia. Did you post that? No answer. Not for 2 hours. Then, finally, we use whatever footage promotes the brand best, nothing personal. I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The white paint had a small crack I hadn't noticed before, like something had been straining there for a while, trying not to break. And suddenly, I wasn't 37 anymore. I was 9. It was the church auditorium, our elementary talent show. I'd practiced the piano piece for months. Beethoven, the little sonata that my teacher said was harder than it sounded. I played it cleanly, no missed notes, even the chords came out full. Then Julia walked on stage after me and sang a song from a Pixar movie. Off-key, but loud, confident. Afterward, Dad gave me a thumbs up and said, "You played well, May." Mom. She'd leaned over to him, sighed, and whispered, loud enough for me to hear. She stole the spotlight again. Well, can't you let your sister shine just once? Her words haunted me, a lifelong sentence of invisibility. I had only just learned to braid my own hair, and already I'd been labeled the shadow, the supporting act. I shut the laptop, pushed it away like it burned, then sat back, watched the metal swing slightly from its hook above my desk lamp. Dad's words echoed from memory again. They can't ignore what you make real. Maybe they could. Maybe they already had. I whispered into the room, not to anyone else, not even to myself, really, but to the part of me that was starting to shift. The part that had stopped asking for a seat and started eyeing the table itself. If I'm going to be erased, it won't be quiet. I didn't make a scene. I didn't storm out. I showed up. That week, I walked back into the studio like I'd never seen the real, like my face hadn't been plastered across strangers' feeds, like I hadn't just been erased from my own story. The mats didn't greet me, and neither did the people. I stretched in the far corner, alone. Nora passed by with a clipboard and tight-lipped smile but didn't say hello. Ethan stood on the other side of the room with the newer students, gesturing big and loud like always. He caught a glimpse of me tying my belt. "Some folks are just persistent," he said with a chuckle to the group. "Not always in a good way." A couple of them laughed. His taunt was a spark to my resolve. I tightened the knot on my belt and turned toward the wall. I didn't flinch, but I filed it away. That evening, after my shift at the non-profit office, I sat down at my dining table with my laptop, meaning to order a new pair of compression sleeves. My knees had started to protest a bit louder after last week's lesson. Instead, I found myself opening up my credit card statements. It started as a distraction, then it stopped being one. On the second page, a transaction caught my eye. Serenity Flow Consulting, $200, 0 cents. It wasn't new. It was from the first of this month, but the name rang loud. I recognized the tax ID number listed next to it. I'd helped file the paperwork for it 5 years ago. I dug a little deeper. That same vendor name came up again and again. One every month for 22 months. My stomach clenched. I called the customer line, fingers trembling just enough to make me hit the wrong extension twice. "Ma'am," the woman on the line finally said, "this vendor has had a recurring authorization since July of the year before last." "Want me to cancel it?" "No," I replied quickly. "Not yet. I needed to see more." I pulled the fireproof lockbox from the top of my closet, laid it on the table, and sifted through folders, receipts, lease agreements, scanned tax documents. There it was, a copy of the capital agreement. Julia's handwriting still looped across the margin in pink pen. "Just a formality, May. You're the best." I scanned the page, reading and rereading the clause. 30% silent ownership contribution, non-voting, no withdrawal unless by dissolution or mutual consent. Silent. That word stuck harder than any math. Their deception was a financial theft of my future. I remembered the conversation. Julia had begged me to help bridge the gap for the studio's original funding. I had the credit, she didn't. Ethan wasn't even in the picture back then. It was just us sisters. She promised quarterly reports. I hadn't received one. I stared at the document like it was a betrayal that had only now decided to bleed. The next day, I booked a quiet appointment with a CPA 2 towns over. Her name was Linda. She had a bob haircut and eyes that didn't flinch when I laid out everything on her desk. She scanned the papers slowly, highlighting parts with soft clicks of her pen. Finally, she looked up. "You're listed here as a financial backer, no voting rights, but according to the loan agreement attached to this EIN, they used your name to secure their most recent SBA operating loan." I sat back. "But I never signed for that." "No," she confirmed. "You didn't. But your ownership interest was used as equity evidence. Legally, that's gray. Ethically, it's a minefield. Their fraud was a legal violation I would not dismiss." My mouth felt dry, and all that footage, my name being erased from the business. She paused. "Technically, that's branding. They're not required to feature you, but if they're using your financial contribution and not acknowledging it, well, you've got grounds to challenge it, quietly or not." Linda offered to draft a non-disclosure agreement while I decided what to do next. I signed, but my voice, it didn't shake anymore. That night after my office shift, I met with Lucy, my co-worker from fundraising, for a quick bite at a Mexican place near the office. We sat in a booth by the window. It was one of those nights where spring wasn't sure if it wanted to stay cold or finally give in to warmth. She could tell I wasn't all there. "You've been folding your napkin for 15 minutes, she said gently. I gave her a half smile. "You ever feel like someone borrowed your hands to build something, then told everyone you were just the helper?" Lucy didn't blink. "Every non-profit worker I've ever treated with PTSD says the same thing." I tilted my head. She went on. "They carry everything, then get told they're emotional or too much, or that the world owes them nothing because strength doesn't count unless it's visible." Her words were a mirror to my pain. I leaned back. That word again. Visible. I'd never wanted to outshine anyone. I just didn't want to be invisible anymore. We finished dinner quietly. Lucy didn't pry. She didn't have to. When the check came, I pulled out my wallet. I paused over the signature line of the receipt. And for the first time in years, I didn't just sign my name. I added a title too, carefully, clearly. Maya Morris, co-founder, Serenity Flow Studio. This act was my first step to reclaiming my legacy. The screen faded to black as I closed my laptop and tucked it into my bag. I didn't sleep much that night, but not because of anger. I'd already spent too many nights chewing on that. What kept me up now was clarity, sharp and cold. By morning, the clarity had settled into resolve. I arrived at the studio earlier than usual. The sun hadn't fully cleared the neighboring rooftops yet, and the parking lot was still mostly empty. My breath hung in the air as I stepped out of the car, but my hands no longer trembled. I walked straight past the mats, past the lockers, and to the office. Ethan and Julia were inside, her perched on the edge of the desk, him spinning in the chair like he had nothing better to do. "Can we talk?" I said, my voice level. They looked up. Julia's brows knit for just a second. Surprise? Annoyance? She nodded slowly. "Sure." I closed the door behind me, but gently, not the kind of slam you save for dramatic effect. I didn't need theatrics. I placed 3 documents on the desk, unfolding each with deliberate calm. The business registration form, the financial deductions printout, the original silent partner agreement. "This," I said, tapping the last page, "is your only chance to fix this quietly." Julia blinked at the papers, then lifted her eyes to meet mine. Her face stayed neutral. She always had that talent. But the silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was calculation. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't bother hiding his disdain. He let out a short, dry laugh. "You kept those. You were never supposed to be involved this deep." I didn't respond. Julia tilted her head slightly, her voice soft but ice-cold. "Oh, Maya, it's not a good look to dig up old deals. We're in a different league now. And dragging this into the light just makes you seem bitter." Her words were a desperate attempt to silence me. "Stay on the mats," Ethan added, leaning back in the chair with a smug smile. "But don't think you're owed more than that." The air in the room felt tighter. Then Ethan's grin widened and he leaned forward. "Hell, if you weren't Julia's sister, I'd have cut you the first week. You know that, right?" His threat was a final challenge I would meet. My eyes didn't leave his. My hands didn't shake, but my fingers tapped once, just once, on the edge of the desk. Julia looked down at the sound. I gathered the documents without rush, folding them with the same precision. Then, just as I turned to leave, I said low and clear, "There are 2 copies of this file, the others not in my possession anymore." I didn't wait for a reaction. I didn't give them the chance to posture or spin. I walked out without another word. No slamming doors, no grand exit. Let them stew. As I passed the front desk, Nora appeared from the hallway, clipboard in hand. She saw me, smirked, and tilted her head with that mock-concerned tone she used when she wanted to feel superior. "Everything okay, Coach?" I didn't slow down. "It's about to be." She blinked, her expression faltering for a split second before she looked away. Outside, I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door gently. I let the silence settle around me as I sat in the parked car. My reflection stared back from the dark screen of the dashboard. Then my phone buzzed, an automatic reminder from a sports registry app I hadn't used in years. Upcoming events. Seattle Open registration closes in 2 days. I hadn't competed since my early 30s. Back then, I used to train between office shifts, practice with men twice my size, come home with bruises and a grin. I opened the app. My old profile still existed. Faded headshot. Outdated stats. I updated the information, scrolled through the categories, and hit submit. There it was, just a click, really. But the sound of that button, even imagined, was louder than any door I could have slammed that morning. I didn't flinch when I clicked submit, but my hand stayed on the mouse long after the confirmation screen faded. A strange stillness followed, like the moment after an earthquake, when nothing's moving, but you know the world has changed underneath you. At dawn the next day, I was on the floor of my apartment barefoot, on a taped yoga mat, shadow practicing in silence. The walls were thin. I kept it light, quiet. By nightfall, I was driving across town to the old community center where Surgeon Thompson, Dad's old friend, waited. The place hadn't been updated in years. The mats were warped, the lighting flickered, and the air always smelled faintly of metal and floor wax. But Thompson moved like time never touched him. "Grip like this," he'd say, adjusting my wrist. "Explode your hips, not your ego." We trained until my body shook, Then we trained more. "You're not practicing for a trophy, May," he said once as we sat on the edge of the mat, sweat soaking through my sleeves. "You're practicing for the right to be seen." He wasn't wrong. This wasn't about medals. It was about being real again in a world that had flattened me into a footnote. One day before the Seattle Open, he handed me a printed form. "I filed this," he said simply. I scanned it. He'd entered me as a master alternate, citing my years practicing under military combat instructors. "It's legal," he said, "and earned." I didn't speak for a moment. My throat tightened, not from doubt, but from how long it had been since someone stood behind me without an angle. His support was a beacon in their darkness. That evening, back at the studio, I trained alone while Nora lingered near the water cooler, whispering to another student. I didn't care until the next morning when I opened my phone, a video, slowed down, edited, no sound. It was me during a warm-up drill, getting thrown, not even full contact, just a misstep. The caption read, "Someone's practicing for Seattle." For what, though? It was tagged to a wellness page I didn't follow, but others did. The comments came fast. "She's delusional. This has to be a joke. Midlife crisis yoga edition." I didn't cry. I didn't delete it. I just closed my phone and sat there in the dark, the soft hum of the fridge the only sound in the apartment. I almost canceled. I almost let them win. I typed out the message to Thompson. "Maybe I'm not ready." The reply came fast. "You were ready before you let them in your head." His words were a call to reclaim my power. That hit harder than anything Ethan had ever thrown at me. The next day, I was quieter than usual at work. Even my colleagues noticed. One of the older volunteers, a man who usually avoided small talk, waited behind after our meeting. He handed me a folded piece of printer paper, yellowed at the corners. A drawing done in pencil. A lone woman barefoot, standing tall on a mat, while shadows laughed from the sidelines. But her posture was solid, unshakable. "That's you," he said. "You hold your ground, even when it shakes." His gift was a testament to my resilience. I didn't say thank you. I couldn't get the words out. I just nodded, tucked the drawing into my folder, and walked away before my voice betrayed me. That night, I didn't sleep. I trained again. I ran the same pose 25 times until my arms burned. I whispered the line Thompson gave me. "You were ready before you let them in your head." Then I whispered the volunteer's line. "You hold your ground even when it shakes." And I meant them both. The next day I drove to Seattle before dawn, checked in at the registration desk, signed the waiver. My name typed in black and white looked foreign and familiar at once. 3 matches passed. 4, then over the loudspeaker. "Due to withdrawal in the master bracket, alternate Maya Morris has been selected." The floor seemed to tilt slightly, but I walked steady, step by step, toward the mat. When I looked up, Ethan was already standing there, hands on hips, mouth curved in something between a smirk and disbelief. He leaned toward the ref, whispered something, then looked at me. This wasn't part of the plan.
"The plans change."
The referee raised his hand, motioning me forward. I stepped onto the mat, the surface slightly sticky beneath my bare feet, a subtle give with each step. Ethan stood across from me, arms crossed, shoulders rolled forward in that performative toughness he wore like a uniform. I could hear murmurs ripple through the crowd lining the GYMNASUM. "Isn't that the lady from that video? No way! Ethan's actually competing with her, right? She's just a charity case. What's this even about?" Julia moved fast. She whispered something sharp to the tournament official, hand resting too lightly on his forearm, but the man just shook his head and gestured toward the mat. Brackets locked. No backing out now. I turned toward Ethan and bowed. Clean, respectful. Not to him, but to the moment. He returned the bow half-heartedly, slower, eyes locked on mine like he was trying to summon intimidation. But I didn't look back at him. I looked through him. I wasn't here to beat Ethan. I was here to finish something they started years ago and tried to bury under merch and marketing. The ref called for the start. Ethan lunged before the echo of the whistle faded. I didn't flinch. I shifted, caught his momentum, controlled the collar, and redirected. It was all feel, his balance off, his pressure too greedy. He recovered barely and charged again, but this time he overcommitted. I seized the angle, arm drag. Weight shift. Shoulder drop. Trap. He tapped. The whistle blew. 12 seconds. There was a pause. A deep, stunned silence. Then a single clap. Then another. Then a slow rolling cheer. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. Ethan stood, jaw clenched. He didn't bow. Didn't look back. Just walked off the mat, past the edge, through the crowd. A man avoiding his own shadow. Julia stood frozen behind the barrier, lips parted as if a script had been ripped from her hands mid-speech. I remained kneeling for a second longer than I had to. Then I bowed again, not to Ethan, not to the crowd, but to the moment itself, the silence, the years, the scar that finally stopped burning. At the edge of the mat, Thompson waited, arms crossed, face unreadable. He didn't hug me, didn't clap. "That's what it means to hold your line," he said. I nodded. Behind us, the whispers shifted. People no longer whispered ridicule. That was her. She held him like he was nothing. 12 seconds. Their shock was my triumph. When I stood, my legs didn't shake. My breath came easy. I looked around, not for approval but for something else. Confirmation. I found it in Julia's approach. She walked slow like a politician heading to a mic. Her smile was tight, her words tighter. That was unexpected. I tilted my head slightly. You never asked what I knew, you assumed what I didn't. My words were a challenge she couldn't answer. The look in her eyes changed, just a flicker. But I saw it. I'd seen it before. The first time I outpaced her in math class. The time I fixed her proposal slide deck overnight and she submitted it under her name. It was fear, not of me, of losing control. I reached into my bag and pulled out the faded gray towel. Creased, frayed, still smelling faintly of lavender balm. The one Ethan tossed at my feet weeks ago like I was background noise. I walked back to the exact spot on the mat where I'd been thrown, where they laughed, where the slow-motion clip looped online like a punchline. I folded the towel in half, then in half again, and I laid it gently on the floor. No words, no drama, just placed it there. Then I turned and walked away. Behind me, someone whispered, 12 seconds. Another voice responded, soft but cutting. And 18 years of being underestimated. I hadn't even taken off my shoes when the alert hit my phone. A link, anonymous. No sender ID, just a headline that made my stomach drop. Manipulated sympathy. Manufactured strength. I opened it anyway. I already knew what I'd find. There it was. My fall at the studio loop looped side by side with the Seattle match. The clip had been slowed down, the context stripped out, and the captions were damning. Staged to win. She played the victim first. A few scrolls down, and I saw the comments. Look at her milk it for clout. This is what happens when people can't win clean. Didn't she cry to get in that bracket? But I didn't cry. Not once, not to them. And this wasn't surprise. This was Ethan's final card. Messy, desperate, and mean. His last attempt to discredit me was pathetic. I didn't flinch. Instead, I forwarded the entire chain of screenshots, along with my credentials, my master recognition, my Army instructor history, and the tournament approval letter to the committee, the forum owner, and the National Wellness Association. 2 hours later, the post was gone. 4 hours in, the forum issued a formal apology. We regret the publishing of unverified and defamatory content. The practitioner in question remains in good standing. No roar of justice, no banner headlines, but silence this time. Meant retraction. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my father's old legal folder, the one marked Morris Holdings. Tucked inside behind decades of Army benefit paperwork was my original silent partner contract with Serenity Flow Studio. 30% stake, no voting rights, but financial documentation required quarterly. There had been none. There was also a line I'd overlooked when Jalea first pushed it in front of me 5 years ago. Transitory may not be removed or diminished without written consent. I picked up the phone. The business attorney was older, soft-spoken, and didn't blink when I explained. They used my name on loan paperwork. They built my card without permission. They erased my involvement while still profiting from it. He simply said, "Then we have grounds." By Monday, an emergency board meeting had been called. It was held in a quiet conference room at a local community bank with 6 board members present and 3 calling in over Zoom. Thompson sat beside me, not as a representative, but as a witness. When he spoke, his voice didn't raise, but it carried. She was there when the lights were hung, when the mats were rolled in. When Jalea begged for the down payment in the back of a Toyota in the middle of a snowstorm, the Zoom connection crackled as a familiar voice came through, the retired official from Seattle Open. I was there. Her credentials are valid. Her performance was earned. Then the vote, 6-3, Jalea was removed as executive director of Serenity Flow Studio. Ethan was permanently banned from all Serenity Flow affiliated events. Someone asked if I'd be stepping into the role. I shook my head. I'm not here to replace anyone. I want my name restored, my percentage honored, and the footage taken down. My demands were a reclamation of my rightful place. Then I stood. That part was over. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A number I knew before it even lit up. "Julia?" I stared at it for a beat too long, then answered. There was no hello, just silence, then a breath, and finally her voice strained like something had cracked behind it. "You've always had a way of making me feel like I wasn't enough." I didn't react. Not for her. "I never needed you to feel small," I said calmly. "I just needed space to exist beside you." She didn't reply, just hung up. I set the phone down and walked to the kitchen, poured water into a chipped glass, and drank it slowly. The next morning, a padded envelope arrived at the office. There was no return address, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. My father's. Thompson must have found it in one of the boxes from storage. Inside a single page, lined in faint blue ink, "To Maya, the one who never needed applause to lead. Let them come second. You've always been first where it counted. Dad." His letter was a final affirmation of my worth. I didn't cry right away. I sat with it, held it between my palms like something alive. And then quietly, I wept. The kind of weeping that doesn't come with heaving or sound, just tears, slow and full, dripping onto the paper like punctuation. That evening, I made no calls, no texts. I turned on the camera in my apartment, knelt on the training mat I'd laid out weeks ago and pressed record. No speech, just me kneeling. I reached behind, pulled out the gray towel I'd carried to every session, the one Ethan had once thrown at me like a joke. I folded it in half, then in half again, placed it on the mat, pressed stop, uploaded the clip to my private channel. No title, no caption, just a video of a woman who held her ground, quietly. 5 months later, the gym I work out of smells like dust and lavender balm. It's not much. An old rec center in Tacoma that barely holds heat in winter, but it's mine. On Mondays and Wednesdays, the lights buzz overhead as a handful of women filter in. A retired teacher rehabbing her hip, a mother of 3 who escaped an abusive marriage, a nurse with arthritis in her left knee but fights still in her spine. None of them come here to get famous. They come because something inside them went quiet, and they're ready to hear it again. Most days I don't say much. We train, we breathe, we laugh, sometimes, but not always. There's no scoreboard, no trophies on the wall, just mats that shift a little if you step too hard on the corner, and a speaker that plays classic rock, low enough to be ignored, but steady enough to keep pace. One Wednesday afternoon, I noticed a woman leaning in the doorway just as I was wrapping up class. She wasn't dressed for training, no eyeliner, no entourage, just Nora, hair tied back, hoodie too big for her frame, no makeup, no camera in sight. "Didn't know you taught here," she said, voice quiet, eyes not meeting mine at first. I handed a student her water bottle and turned back toward Nora. "I don't advertise." She stepped inside almost hesitantly. "I didn't know how badly I needed to be taught by someone who doesn't care about winning followers." I didn't answer, I just gestured to the bench. She sat. The class resumed behind me. Nora stayed through it all, watching, silent, not interrupting. And when it ended, she bowed with the others. Not to me, to the practice. That was enough. The next day, something arrived in the mail. No return address. Just my name on the envelope, handwritten in ink I recognized from old birthday cards and post-it notes on childhood lunchboxes. Inside, a single line, written in Julia's script. "I watched your video. I finally saw you. I hope it's not too late." Her note was a crumbling of her defenses. I didn't respond, but I took the note, folded it neatly, and placed it in the same wooden box where my father's letter now lives. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Because sometimes closure isn't about rebuilding a bridge. Sometimes it's about planting your feet on solid ground and choosing not to step back into the fire. Later that week, I stayed after class a little longer than usual. The air was quiet, the last student had gone, and the radio had shut off on its own. I sat on the edge of the mat, fingers moving slowly as I tied my belt into place. I reached for the gray towel. The same one Ethan once tossed at me like I was there to wipe up sweat instead of spill truth. The same towel I folded in the Seattle footage. No words, no vengeance, just gravity. This time I laid it out beside me. Not for drama, not for remembrance, just because it belonged there like I did. My final act was a silent victory. I didn't think of revenge. I didn't think of Julia or Ethan or the boardroom or the whispers. I just sat there breathing, aware of my own weight, my own space. The woman who once got erased in someone else's story now wrote her own in silence. And that silence didn't mean defeat. It meant decision. If this were a movie, maybe the screen would fade to black here. But this isn't a movie. It's just me living still. Still holding the line. Some people think silence means defeat, but sometimes it's where real power begins. 12 Secrets didn't make me strong. What I did before and after did. Have you ever been the invisible one in your own family until you decided not to be? Tell me. I'll be here listening.